everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
So I've been thinking a lot about like people in my tech space.
Yeah.
And we have some of these characters that are like kind of famous, right?
Oh.
Like we've got Steve Jobs, we've got Bill Gates, we've got Mark Zuckerberg, right?
Oh,
we've
right.
got these like larger than life characters that really like kind of form and dictate the way people think they should act as like a person running a tech company.
Oh, that's really
right.
interesting.
Like I'm a tech company CEO. Should I act like Steve Jobs? Probably not.
Please don't.
But we have like we've created this like culture and kind of mythology, and we put these certain people up on these pedestals.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And I just think it's really interesting because maybe the way those people were when they were like actually maybe in the middle of their careers is so much different than where we've like now elevated them to.
Right.
This like realm of like computer or tech god.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that's really an interesting thing. I mean, I think you're kind of talking about like hero worshiping,
Yeah, like
right?
hero worship. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so funny. I was having breakfast this morning with a client of mine, and we had this really interesting conversation that reminds me of what you're saying now. It's like years ago, I had really specific visions about the heroes that I worshiped. Just a real specific expectations and like also blinders on who they really were completely. And as I've matured, air quotes, and just as they have matured, how that shifts and changes over time.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's a lot of people that we aspirationally worship because of like some of these big guys that you're naming. I think we also have all these same kind of people in our lives today.
Yeah, right. I mean, we can talk about like I don't know, business idols.
Yeah,
but there are celebrities and actors and political figures and all of these different kinds of people that will like push up on these kind of like hero pedestals.
Yeah.
I think, and it's really interesting behavior. Like, why do we do that?
Why do we do that? Do you feel that the world right now has gone crazy overboard about some of these people? Like,
Well,
take your
question.
pick. I mean, take your pick who they are. I'm not trying to create a political conversation, but just literally, like, if you think about these people that are really, really famous now and how we worship them.
Well, do you think that's a great question. I mean, I would love to talk with someone and ask them if this same sort of thing happened. Like, you know, you hear about like, I don't know, like early movie stars of the 30s, right?
Oh, sure.
They would be the same thing. And then we have all sorts of like, you know, actual kind of godlike characters from the past, like the whole Greek god.
Oh, right. Mythology.
Mythology.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, which was probably
I loved Greek mythology.
Mythology, right? Is probably based in something. So you would have these, I think it's just human nature.
It must be.
I don't think it's anything more recent. That I think maybe the difference more recently is that some of these characters are able to use social media to really quickly like sort of disseminate and amplify like their
words.
position.
That's really, really good. So do you think, So are you suggesting that nothing's really changed societally about how we think about heroes, but that because of the age of social media, that it has changed the landscape of how we communicate and how quickly we communicate?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe like with the information age,
Yeah.
I think maybe some of these people can get elevated into this like hero position globally way faster.
Yeah. What do you
Whereas
think is the...
maybe like 200, 300, 500 years ago, it would be maybe more isolated
and
to
organic.
be regionally organic. Yeah, and it would only spread through word of mouth or maybe written, but it was much slower process to spread the word.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, like if you just think about, I always reflect on the Martin Luther King speech that he did in Washington, D.C., the I Have a Dream speech, in which there were thousands and thousands of people congregated to listen to him, and how quickly he put that together in an age where there was no way of social media connection. You know, like I think we talked about that in the past.
Imagine nowadays he could just like have a Zoom meeting and everyone could hear it. A Facebook Live.
Right. He could just make a reel.
Well, not that we're going to talk about it, but I think there are some people today that have used those social media platforms to really catapult themselves into that celebrity really quickly.
When they have no business being there, perhaps even. Really. Right?
No politics. We're not talking politics.
No, I mean, but it isn't just politics. It could be arts and entertainment. It could be musicians. It could be tech billionaires. It could be, I mean, take your pick though. It's like the people who are very savvy in knowing how to push a message out. It's like we've almost stopped thinking about what the message actually is. And we're simply paying attention to the energy and the speed in which it pops out.
So why do you think we have this human tendency to like idealize certain people?
That's such a good question. I've actually been thinking about this question in my own life in the last couple of weeks. I don't really know what spurred it, but you know, I mean, I'm always telling everybody I'm 57 years old. And for another, few weeks, I could say that. I feel like when I was younger, I really needed heroes to worship. I needed someone to look up to in a number of places. Like I needed somebody that I could aspirationally be like in sales. I needed somebody I could, worship that got somewhere that I didn't think I could ever go, but suddenly they gave me this like hope, So I think when I was younger, I had a lot different perspective about who my heroes were and why. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would see people that maybe had like certain values or accomplished things, especially like in business. It would be like, oh, I want to be like that person. Like, like I, some of those tech people that I mentioned, like Steve Jobs, I think is great. I mean, he had really strong opinions around product and design. And I was like, I want really strong opinions around product and design. I want to make things like the iPhone. Like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
So I think it is really helpful to see how certain people that behave and act and make decisions and aspire to be like them. I don't think there's anything bad about that.
No, I don't either. As a matter of fact, I think there's some wonderful pieces to that. A lot of times I think that when we do start attaching ourselves to people that have absolutely accomplished amazing things, I think it gives us a little more like, wow, actually this is possible. Like, it gives you that view that it isn't impossible. And it gives you the view that, wow, maybe I'm not thinking big enough.
Yeah. It's that whole thing. I'll get the numbers wrong, but like, as in like marathon racing, right? Like, like there was some point in time where everyone thought like, hey, you can't run a marathon faster than like a certain speed. And then someone broke the record and then and then all of a sudden a bunch of other people could run it that fast.
Right.
right?
And
so that happens with these
right.
records over and over. They get broken, and then a bunch of people then accomplish the same thing.
Right.
It just takes that first one to do it.
Hey, did I ever tell you I ran a half marathon, the very first one I ever did, in 2 hours and 13 minutes? And I was so proud of myself.
Time? I have no idea.
Okay. It was a first timer's time, right? So to me, I didn't care. I was like, oh my gosh, 2 hours and 13 minutes. I did a half marathon. Okay. The full marathon started 1 hour after our race. Okay. And the full marathon won it in 2 hours and 9 minutes.
They passed you.
This is a little sidebar. It's like, oh, actually 2 hours and 13 minutes that other people can run twice the speed. But yes, that's a really good example. That's a really good example.
Yeah.
You know what I think is interesting about just my own reflections of my development and my kind of maturing over time? When I was young, some of these people that I put on pedestals, because aspirationally they did something specific or they had some sort of, I don't know, they were known for something. I also made tremendously bad decisions about putting the blinders on who these people were as full human beings.
Yeah.
That is something that is so different for me today.
Yeah, I think that's maybe part of the downside of that, like idealizing someone in that way. Like you don't really see maybe like the negative, or you just choose to not see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually can give you sort of a misinterpretation in a way. Like if you see somebody in business that's able to just like catapult themselves well beyond everyone else in their field.
Yeah.
And all you think about is, oh my gosh, I want to be that. I want to be that big. I want to make that much money. Yeah. And yet when you look around the corner and find that their business practices are not fair or honest.
Well, in my example of Steve Jobs, he was a notorious asshole to all of his employees, and he was a horrible person to his family.
Right.
So that's not a thing that I want to be like.
Yeah.
Right? I want to be like a more complete person than just shipping awesome product.
Yeah, exactly.
And, being horrible in other parts of my life. So, but we don't see or talk about that stuff with these heroes, right? We tend to, as a culture, really only focus on the things that we want, like that are positive, and not so much the negative stuff.
Right. So do you think that we've gone really, really crazy overboard in that?
That's a good question. I would say specifically in my industry, the reason I don't like this like hero worship stuff is because it gives such unrealistic expectations of what is possible. It's like there's a bunch of people working on startups that I know, I've got my businesses, I've got a startup, and you look at all of these people that I know that are just in this tech world, none of them are going to be, and me included, are going to be Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. And none of our businesses are going from like zero to billions of dollars overnight. They just create such a unrealistic expectation of how life is. And I think social media kind of really does not help with this idea. Is that you, like, when you only look at like the top 0.001% of people and their performance, like the very tippity top, and you compare yourself to that, it's really not great for your mental health.
No, it's depressing.
Yeah.
It's depressing because it makes you feel like your contributions are so minuscule. What's the point? I mean, I'm overstating, but in some ways, maybe I'm not.
You're right. And to me, that's why when I was thinking about my cast of characters, I don't really like it because it creates such a skewed view of reality.
I think that's true in my industry too. You talk about personal development, coaching, executive coaching. You look at some of the majors, right? Even just, taking it out of the tech, but look at the big thought leaders about self-improvement. You've got Tony Robbins, you've got Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, Les Brown. You have all of these, John Maxwell. you have all of these really big names that have been adding, you know, to the collective information for a really long time. And when I was younger, again, it was like, oh my gosh, I want to be that next thought leader. I want to be that next whatever. And there really is that. I wonder if the way society is today, if there will ever be big leaders like that again. Maybe there will, but how and where and in what?
Yeah. Well, why would you think that they wouldn't emerge the next generation?
Well, it's not that I'm not thinking that. I don't know. I mean, I wonder. And I think the reason I wonder is because the next generation, the amount of information that gets kicked out and the speed in which it doesn't provide much longevity. It's like everything is a flash in the pan. You know, like if you even look at a lot of the musical stars that we have today, there's a handful of them that are still maintaining sort of that presence and that constant creation. But there's so many that don't. And, you know, when we were even in our 20s or whatever, back in, you know, a long time back, there just weren't those numbers of people. So the impact that the ones that were doing something, their impact was greater. It was longer, more consistent. So it's just...
I see what you're saying. Like when information didn't travel so quickly, it took many years or decades to build up that hero status. Whereas today, maybe you could achieve it, I mean, quite literally overnight.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
That's
for
really
how
interesting
long?
to think about. And right. And maybe it becomes like much more temporary.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to think. And I guess the question that brings me to in this conversation is, what does that do for those that we worship? I mean, worship is a big word, but it's truth. This is how
idolize.
we idolize. Yeah, right. Exactly.
I am sure that there have been like countless like internet celebrities that I don't even remember their names anymore that were super popular like 10 years ago.
I know. I agree. Even 5 years ago.
So it becomes all way more temporary than it used to be.
Yeah. And what does that do to a person that is seeking someone to really latch on to from that perspective of, I want to be just like them? And is it dependent on your age, how you see them? Is it dependent on certain life forces that are occurring in your life that make you have those aspirational attachments?
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because today I'm not sure in my present reality, I'm really not sure who I would consider as someone to idolize or worship.
So are you saying maybe this idea, depending on where you are in your life, changes? Yeah, I am. Because there's been a lot of people in my history, professionally and all sorts of things, that I have really thought, oh my gosh, I want to be close to them. I want to know them. I want to be known by them. And I have. And I've gotten to that place. And you know what? You get in there and you're like, yeah, well, you've shared this
special.
You've shared this before, but it's like John Maxwell, right? John Maxwell was absolutely one of your heroes for a long time. And you wanted to do a lot of things that he did. And then you did get to the point where you're on stage with him, you knew him, and then what happened? He just turned into a regular person. As horrible as that sounds, right?
Very good man.
Secret,
but some big gaps.
He was a regular person the whole time.
Yes.
But maybe that's kind of interesting to think about, like your journey with that is that that was someone you idolized, but as you got to know him, you just realized like, oh wait, he's not a lot different than I am.
Exactly. And like you and I have shared mentors too, you know, like people that we really have kind of idolized. Like we maybe didn't say it that way, but you know, where it was like, they really, like if you look at Don, for example, he's somebody that you and I both had. And it's like, there was so much about him and he's now passed, but there was so much about him that I did just absolutely, I mean, I would never use the word idolized if he were within earshot, because he would roll his eyes. He would hate it. But there were so many things about him where I just thought, wow, he's just amazing. Like, you know, the conclusions that he comes to with the information that he's using, like, I want to become so much better. Like, I want to be more like that. You know, and yet he had his faults and he had his ways too. And I don't know, I think maybe the way that I see things now, I'm a lot more realistic in how I picture some of those relationships and some of those people that I aspired to be a lot more like.
Yeah. And maybe what you're trying to do is just pick up little bits of wisdom from the things that, you know, they're really good at, or the way they think, or their strengths, and incorporate those things, but not maybe everything as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's really important when you start to sit back and think about who is it that you really put on a pedestal. I think it's really important for every person that does that to evaluate how balanced is their view. How balanced are you being in that approach? Because it can actually be a little detrimental to yourself if you're not being balanced, because you're trying to be overly optimistic, you're trying to be really positive or what have you. But it can actually be a hindrance for your growth at some point.
And we talk about comparing mind quite a bit, like us maybe comparing ourselves to, you know, our peers or neighbors or some other people. When you start doing that kind of comparison against someone who you really idolize, it really throws off your energy, because again, in general, most of us have no idea how that person got to the point where they are.
Right, exactly.
And like you were saying, it was probably not as squeaky clean, maybe
altruistic
as we like to think.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I will keep Billy Joel out of this conversation, though. I still am absolutely hero worship him. Oh, well, it's an interesting conversation. And I think just today with the political landscape too, you know, things are really out of whack. People are wanting to hang their hat on a person, or hang their hat on a movement, or hang their hat on an idea. And I think that it's setting ourselves up for really big disappointment. Because it's a really strong expectation that's really not based on complete authenticity, but rather hope. And it's based on maybe even fear of it not working. You know, there's just a lot of stuff that's in there that I think is worth thinking about a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I like the idea that we look at some of these people, you know, present or past. I really like actually reading, like you were talking about mythology, or we were talking about mythology. I like really reading about the Stoics. And a lot of their thinking. And those would be people like I kind of idolize as the way like their worldview works. Now, again, I not 100%, but I just take things that I think are really interesting ways to look at the world and incorporate those into my thinking. So I think a really great exercise with hero worship is to look at those traits that you really do idolize and just pull those ones out.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that, is like pull out the trait rather than the whole person. I think it'd give you a much, and you know what? I think that you can still think the same way about these people that you think. But if you're doing so with a little more realism, I actually think that it makes the part about them that you really idolize be able to stand on its own still. I think that's a good thing to do. You don't have to convince yourself that everything is perfect, but this one particular thing is really interesting and you'd like to pursue that piece. I really like that. I think that's super healthy and balanced.
All right. And now I'm going to have to rethink my entire Taylor Swift t-shirt collection.
Oh my gosh.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.